Hey folks, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and today we're going to take a look at a few small, appropriately enough, expansions for the game Small World. Now, if you saw my review for Small World, you know that that is a game that I like quite a lot. And the game kind of lends itself to these little mini expansions, and consequently they've released several of them over the last few years. Now, the three that I'm going to review today are actually promotional items that were given, exclusive promotional items that were given away as part of their latest Kickstarter campaign to fund the Small World iOS and Steam app. Now, the first one is called the Royal Bonus, which is exclusive races and powers just for the Kickstarter backers. The other two are actually reprints of previous promotional expansions given away some years ago. Leaders, which are basically like little tokens that are specific to every type of race, and you can attach them to an army when you're giving, and they'll give you a bonus, and your opponents can try to capture them and so on. And Necromancer Island, which actually changes the game into sort of a one versus all sort of semi-co-op, where one player is trying to win with a completely different win condition against all of the other players, but the other players are still trying to beat everyone else, so it's kind of weird in that way. Now, you know, these have always, even those two have always just been promotional items that can be kind of hard to find when they're out of print, and now especially the Kickstarter Royal Bonus is going to be very hard to find if you didn't actually back the campaign. So before you go and try to track these down and possibly spend a lot of money on them, are they actually going to be worth your time? Well, I'm going to show you what is actually in all of these expansions. Then we're going to come back and I'll let you know what I really think about them. So let's talk about the Royal Bonus first. So the Royal Bonus has 3 new races and 3 new powers for you to add to any of your games, whether it's the base game or perhaps Small World Underground, although I'm not sure how those would interact well with the different boards and such. We'll talk about the Fawns first, and no, I'm not talking about Henry Winkler. So the Fawns are pretty interesting in that whenever they conquer a region, at the end of the turn for every region they conquered, they're going to be able to take one more of their little army tokens. You'll be able to take one more of those, and so your forces will be bolstered. And consequently, there are a lot of Fawns, and here's what the little Fawn tokens look like. However, if you conquer a region that already has an opponent's forces in it, then you'll still get your Fawn at the end of the turn, but your opponent is also going to be able to take one of his race tokens into hand as well. So it's a bit of a trade-off there, and it sort of forces the Fawns to want to take unoccupied regions more than occupied regions, unless it's really worth it to them. So just to give you a little bit of example, this is just a little map that I set up. So if I was to go ahead and take this little hilly region down here, it would be no problem for me, and at the end I would get an extra Fawn token, which is pretty cool. However, if I wanted to take this region here with these Shrub Men, and this is actually an illegal move, but I'll tell you why in a minute, then I would get my extra token at the end, but whoever has the Shrub Men is also going to get one back as well. So it's a bit of a trade-off. Now, why is what I just did an illegal move? Well, let's go ahead and roll right into the Shrub Men, which are these happy fellows right here. Now, the Shrub Men give you 6 troops, which is really good. That's the best you're ever going to get for any race. And their special ability is that whenever they have conquered a forest region and they have troops there, that region cannot be conquered at all by your opponents, and in fact becomes immune to any of your opponent's conquests, special powers or abilities, etc. and etc. In other words, they basically lock down any forest that they take, even when in decline, which is really significant. So, in other words, like I said, I went ahead, when you're the Shrubman player, hopefully if you're at the beginning of the game, you're automatically going to go for as many of the forests as possible, even if it forces you to take some other territory. And on some of the maps, the forests are very tightly clumped together, like these 2 forests are together, and there's just a hill or a mountain between you and the next one. So getting those forests is very critical, and it basically puts you on lockdown there, and it increases the longevity of the race quite a bit, even though it doesn't really matter since, you know, if they're in decline, they'll still go ahead and get their ability. But it does keep you from wanting to put a second race into decline, since the Shrubman will still go away in that case. But very powerful race. But let's go and here's what their tokens look like, in case you care. All right. But let's go ahead and talk about the third race, and that is the Igors. Now, the Igors have some of the best art I've seen on any of the race cards, but their ability is pretty cool and thematic in that every time that at any time anyone conquers a region that is occupied by an opponent, therefore, in most circumstances, forcing that opponent to lose a token, they do not go back to the tray. Instead, the Igor takes them. So let's say that these are my Igor troops, and the Igor troops actually look different from the art on the card. But when the Igors would go in here, and let's say that they can traipse over these fawns, well, the fawns are going to go ahead and get back their 2 tokens as usual, but this one remaining token that would be killed and sent back to the box instead goes towards the Igor player. Now, why would the Igor player want those tokens? Well, that's because at the start of your turn, you're able to trade in as many of those tokens as you have at a rate equal to the number of players in the game to gain more Igor tokens. So, let's say that we're using the 3-player map. If the Igor player has managed to take 3 of an opponent's tokens, well, guess what? They're going to be able to trade in those 3 tokens and get an Igor. And if you've managed to take a lot of enemy tokens, you can get more than 1 in a turn. If you manage to get 6 enemy tokens, you're going to be able to trade in for 2 Igors. So that can be pretty significant. But races are not the only thing that are in the royal bonus. We also have some special powers. So aquatic is very interesting in that if you have the aquatic power, which gives you 3 units, any coastal region is actually worth +1 victory point, +1 coin at the end of a turn, but any other type of inland region is worth -1 coin. So that could be very useful if you're already aiming for the coastal regions, or if coastal regions are easy for you to get to. The fireball, basically every time that anytime that you have taken a magic source, which are one of the little crystal things on the board, you're going to be able to take a fireball token. And basically these will count as 2 race tokens that you can discard and use to help you conquer regions. And there's actually only 4 of these little things in the game, so that's the max that you can have. But basically it just makes it more useful for you to take magic sources, and therefore makes it much easier for you to take more and more territories. And then finally, probably the most interesting one of the new powers is the Behemoths. So what the Behemoths do is that basically for every swamp that you control, you're going to have access to what are essentially more troops for your army. These little male and female hippo people. And the number of these you have are equal to the number of swamps you have. And you're going to keep the stacks of them separate. So you get 1 of each. So if you have 2 swamps, then you actually have 2 hippos of each, and you're actually going to, when you gain them, you can put 1 stack in each of 2 different armies, and they basically count as extra troops for both attack and defense for you. However, they can never actually take a region on their own, so they don't totally count as troops. They have to be attached to a unit, and they're basically just like your front line that you're throwing into battle for you. But if you ever lose control of those swamps, then you're going to lose some of those tokens more and more until it's possible that you have none. But if they're conquered, you don't have to worry about it. You're just going to take the hippos back into hand. And that's basically everything that's in the royal bonus. Now let's talk about leaders. Leaders is a very simple little expansion, and the entire expansion basically consists of these little leader tokens. And they have, the newest version has one for basically every single race that's been released up till now, up to and including the newest races, like the Fawn that just came out with the royal bonus. So there's one for each of these, and these are double-sided. On the other side, there is a 2, signifying 2 victory points. So whenever you take a race and power combo as normal in Small World, you'll have the option to take a leader. You don't have to, but if you have the expansion available, they are always an option for you. And so let's say that I took the Fawn, and I'm starting to put out units. I would basically attach the leader to a unit of Fawns, and what that does, it counts as another unit. It counts as like a free troop for you to put out in order to help conquer a territory. And there is a downside. So that's basically all that it does positively for you. But the downside to this is that if your opponents specifically target a region, let's say that these Igors get down here and they take my region as usual, they'll actually be able to take my leader token. And in fact, that leader token counts in lieu of actually the 1 troop you would normally lose. So you won't lose any troops. You'll take the Fawns back in the hand, but they're going to get your leader. Well, what happens then? Well, if your opponent manages to hold on to your leader until the end of the game, they're going to score that leader as 2 points, which is why it has that 2 on the other side. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can always pay your opponent a ransom of 1 victory coin in order to get that leader back. And that's the decision you have to make. Is it worth giving up a victory point to actually give it to your opponent so that they don't score 2 and you get your leader back as a troop that you can use, or not? That is actually all that there is. Finally, let's talk about Necromancer Island, which is probably the most complicated of the 3 mini expansions, but it's not too bad. When you start off the game, one player must be the Necromancer, and you're going to choose a map that's actually the number of players -1, because the Necromancer doesn't count as a normal player. So in other words, if you're using the 3-player map, that means that it would be a 4-player game, 1 player being the Necromancer. The Necromancer is going to take the titular, which is still a funny word, Necromancer Island, and put it in the central lake of the board. So every one of the boards has a central lake. That's where you're going to put it. This counts as a region that is strictly for the Necromancer's use, that cannot be conquered, and that does not count for any kind of points or any other of the game mechanics I'm going to explain soon. The Necromancer player also takes one other thing, and that's this is the Well of Souls, which is where his ghost units are going to go. The ghost units are the only type of race that the Necromancer is ever going to have access to. These are his units, these are what he's going to use to move around and conquer, and he's always going to have access to them. What the Well of Souls is that basically, much like with the Igors I explained earlier, and this is why the Igors and Necromancer Island do not work together well and do not play nicely together. Any time that someone loses a unit from being conquered, those units go onto the Well of Souls, except for in decline units. And in fact, the Necromancer's own ghosts will go here as well. At the end of anyone's turn, including the Necromancer's turn, the Necromancer can trade in any 4 of these ghosts to get any 4 of these souls on here to get another ghost. That's why it says, 4 for 1 here. Anytime you get a ghost, you're going to put it on your Necromancer Islands. Then you can deploy them as usual. But also, at the beginning of the game, the Necromancer is going to have the opportunity to take 6 powers at random from the stack of powers, and the Necromancer can basically use victory coins to purchase those powers, and any number of powers, and they accumulate on Necromancer Island, and any powers that you have apply to all of your ghosts, and they work together. So you can't have ghosts that are both aquatic and behemoth, the powers that I explained earlier, and you can eventually potentially buy all 6 of the powers you chose at the beginning of the game. You can also use your victory coins to buy more ghosts to put out. And in fact, really that's the only thing that victory coins are good for the Necromancer, because you need them to buy more ghosts and to buy more powers if you want. Well, why is that important? Because the Necromancer's win condition is to basically get every single ghost in its reserve onto the map, whether it's on Necromancer Island or on any number of other regions. If every single ghost is out of the Necromancer's reserve and on the map, the Necromancer wins the game, all the other players lose. That can be quite difficult to do, but that's why it's important to have a good power combination, to take as many regions as possible, and to kill as many of your opponent's guys as possible as well. And that's basically Necromancer Island. Alright, well, what do I think about these expansions? Well, let's just get this out of the way right away. These are not anywhere near what you would call essential expansions. Very similar to some of the other mini expansions for Small World, they're not necessary at all. They add a little bit of variety. If you take all these little mini expansions as a whole together, it does add some much needed variety to the game. But individually, especially when they're hard to find expansions like this, they're just not all that necessary. They're fun, but you could take it or leave it. In fact, the base game of Small World comes with little blank tokens. You could theoretically make them yourself. So this just isn't necessary for you to get unless you're a completionist. I'm a completionist and I love Small World, so that's why I had to have these when the Kickstarter campaign came up. So if you're like me, okay, and you weren't part of the Kickstarter campaign, maybe you want to track these down. Otherwise, it's okay. You can stop watching right here and just, go buy Small World Underground, a full game, for what you may have to end up paying for the 3 of these together. But if you're still interested in them, then I'll break it down as to what I like and don't like about each of them. So the Royal Bonus, which is the Kickstarter exclusive races and powers, All very interesting, actually. I think they're kind of fun. The Igors especially, I love races that add like a new mechanic to the game, even if it's a very small one. Some of the races are kind of, and the powers are kind of boring in that, okay, if you have a forest, you get an extra coin. If you have, a farm, it's farmlands or hills, it costs you one less to take. Well, so whatever, that's okay, but it's kind of boring. The Igors actually work a tiny bit of theme into the game, and the game does need theme at times, even with all the fantasy races of taking the dead body parts essentially of all your vanquished races and cobbling them together into more Frankenstein's monsters. I really like that idea, so that's fun. I think it does have the potential to be overpowered, but then again, it didn't. The people that played with the Igors in the 2 games I played didn't win, so take that as a grain of salt. The fawns are probably the most boring is a harsh word, but they're probably the most uninteresting of the 3 new races. But that doesn't mean that they're bad. I think it's an interesting little twist on the power, being able to replicate your forces, but having to also replicate your opponent's forces. It can be kind of interesting trying to get that strategy to work. Now, the Shrub Men are the one I probably have the most definite opinion on, and that's that I think they're probably overpowered. If the Igors may be overpowered, the Shrub Men definitely are. And in one of the games I played with them, the player who controlled the Shrub Men very early in the game absolutely dominated us for the whole game. And the reason is having those forests on lockdown and having a lot of troops. You get 6 troops for the Shrub Men, which means you're probably, depending on the power combination you're going to have between 9 and 12. It's really, really powerful. It's guaranteed points, and the Shrub Men fall into that category of races like the elves and the skeletons that probably have far too much longevity to keep the game balanced. And not that Small World was ever all that balanced to begin with, but it can be very annoying if you're the one that doesn't get the Shrub Men. But I'm not complaining about the theme and the idea of it. I think it's kind of neat. I just worry that as I play more and more games with them, is that going to be a race like the skeleton or elves that, yoink, you grab it as soon as you can. It's possible. But still, all those races are kind of interesting and fun. Now, the powers that come with the Royal bonus, I'm not as blown away by them. I think, again, they're interesting, but none of them are all that great. The Behemoths, it seems like they would be very powerful, but it's actually very difficult to get that power to work for you. Having to focus on those swamps, then if you lose the swamps, your power becomes less effective. While I think it's neat, I question just how useful it is, and I actually think I would rather have any number of powers from the base game rather than that one. Not to mention the fact that the rulings on it, with the rules that come with the book, are actually fairly poorly worded as far as what mixing up means. Can you have them both in the same area? We played it in 2 different ways and got different results, so I don't know. I hope there's some clarification on that soon. The Fireball is probably the least interesting of the 3, but it's okay. It's not an awful power, just making it temporarily better to take over a couple territories. Again, I think I could probably think of a number of powers from the base game that are better than that. Now, the Aquatic power, that's one that I really question. Is that overpowered as well? It seems like it's not. It's like, oh wow, I get a bonus for coastal territories, but then I take a penalty for every other region on the board? How can that be great? Well, it can be really great if you combo it with a race that's already getting bonuses like the Tritons for being near the coast. I think that even if you don't have a race like that, it's not too hard to focus on the coast, and especially if you're coming in with a new race and you're coming in from the edge of the map and just go straight towards one of those areas and getting those bonus coins reliably. Locking those down means you have to take less regions, and therefore you can double up your forces or triple up your forces on those regions to protect them even better. You become much more of a daunting threat to the other players to try and take over. So I kind of like that power. So the Royal bonus, very neat, not necessary, but if you can get it, it's cool. It adds some neat variety to the game. Now, Leaders is probably the least essential of any of the expansions I'm talking about right now, and probably any expansion for Small World, period. In fact, even though we played 2 games of this in order, 2 games of Small World with all these new expansions in order to, check them out, review them and such, I was the one who had to sort of, when I wasn't playing the Necromancer in the other game, I was the one who had to keep taking the Leaders to see what they were like, because none of the other players were interested in them. No one cared, because they don't do much. They're more. Yes, having an extra unit is cool. You always need just that one more, and that gives it to you. But you become a big target, especially if none of the other players bother with taking the leaders. Everyone was taking a run at me to get my leader so that they can get those 2 bonus points, because that's huge. And if they, even if you ransom them back, you're giving them a coin, a point. So I think it's a fun idea, but wow, either it needed to be better for everyone, more incentive to take them, or just the rules for them needed to be fleshed out more. I don't know. I definitely wouldn't spend money on the Leaders expansion. And if you're getting it for free, like I did, great. But if not, don't bother. Necromancer Island. I got some strong thoughts on this. The idea of it is so cool. I actually like one versus all games quite a bit. I made a geek list on Board Game Geek for them. Check it out. My username is the Kill Shirt if you want to check it out. So I was all for this idea. The thing about it is this. Even though it's got a lot of really cool concepts to it, the idea of spreading out your ghosts and taking souls and starting off with powers you can buy and everything like that, none of it works together very well. And none of the rules take into account, even though this is supposed to be an updated version, none of the rules really take into account some of the other stuff, the other race powers and power badge combos that can totally screw up the Necromancer and make it almost impossible for them to win. In fact, right in this batch of expansions is one that's going to do it, and that's the Igors. With the Igors in play, which happened in the game that I was the Necromancer, all of the souls that should have gone to me to help me have a chance at winning, and I probably wasn't going to win anyway, instead went to Igor, the player controlling the Igors. And she was able to just, trade those in, get more and more troops for her, and she would, sometimes she would purposely not trade in stuff to get more Igors just so that she wouldn't give more souls to me. So effectively, it totally crippled my character, and it just seems like they didn't take into account a lot of little stuff like that. And the game is heavily weighted against the Necromancer. I certainly did not have anywhere near an equal chance as the other players to win. And I don't know if it becomes better or worse with more players. The Necromancer was only played in 2 games with us with 3 and 4 players. 5, I don't know. But it just seemed clunky. It just seems like it added too much, just that little too much complexity to the game. Not that it was that hard to figure out, but I don't know. A neat concept that probably isn't right for this particular game, Small World, which is supposed to be very, very light once you actually get into it. I would like to see an actual full game make use of this kind of, like a co-op or a one versus all game. Because that's the thing too, is that even though it sort of makes it into a one versus all game, it's really not. The other players really don't. They care about you and they care about screwing you over, but really they're just doing their own objectives anyways, and they're certainly not working with each other to defeat you as the Necromancer. So that felt odd as well. This really felt like it was just a fever dream of either the designer or one of the other people working for the company, like, hey, this would be great, let's just throw this together and give it away for free, which is what they did before, and now they're doing it with the Kickstarter campaign. So I don't know, totally unessential. Can be fun to try if someone in your group has it, but otherwise I would probably pass. So this probably doesn't seem like a very glowing review, and I guess it's not, but I do think that having expansions for Small World is a good thing, especially when it's powers and races. So in that case, the Royal Bonus is probably the best of these 3. You can definitely skip the other 2, but you should definitely check out some of the other expansions for Small World, which have more and more stuff and are probably a better value. But that doesn't change how I feel about the base game. I really love Small World, and I think it's a great game that everyone should check out. So that was the 3 expansions: Royal Bonus, Necromancer Island, and Leaders for Small World. This is Nick signing off, reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.